Like, we could beat this horse to death. We've heard it over and over and over again that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But what does that mean practically? What type of process are you going to put in place, and what type of metrics are we going to hold you accountable to ensure that you don't crowd your schedule with everything except for the things that make the most amount of difference? Because everything has a time value attached. Critical thinking has a time value attached. Preparing for that meeting and thinking about, okay, I know the outcome. How exactly do I plan this out based upon what I know about my person, so that she can hear me in a way that will produce the change without crushing her spirit unnecessarily?
Welcome to the Leadership Disrupted podcast. Today we have with us Ian Watts. Ian is an accomplished author, speaker, coach, and expert on workforce transformation. He helps executives enhance employee engagement, boost team performance, and reduce employee turnover. And as the founder of SB Dream Coach and the Employee Success Company, Ian has transformed leaders in over 30 industries across 40 plus states and globally in countries like China, Canada, and Saudi Arabia. Ian's mission is to build businesses that bless the world. I love that. And we're thrilled to have him with us here today. Ian, welcome, first of all, to Leadership Disrupted. And I would love for you to fill in any gaps, or just like share with us your background story before we kind of dive into the nitty-gritty of it all. But tell us about Ian Watts.
Sounds good. Well, first, let me say thank you so much, Dan. I'm really excited to be a part of this amazing podcast. I had an opportunity to check out multiple episodes. So I have, you can't see it, but my feet are moving under the desk with excitement. So if you'll permit, I'll take the longer route, since we'll be spending a little bit of quality time, and share a little bit about my background and talk about how the through line of my background and what I've been doing over the past 20 years brings me to where I am. So I was born and raised on the east side of Detroit, and my story is somewhat familiar to a lot of boys and girls, particularly African-American boys and girls, or at least minorities in urban areas. Some, not all, in that my father was in prison. My mother and my brother, who's 4 years my senior, and we lived on welfare. As a matter of fact, I know the number. We lived on less than $580 per month. So as you can imagine, I wanted to get as fast and as far away from that reality as possible. And I saw entrepreneurship as a way out. And because I naively thought that money was the answer to all of my problems, I was running hard from poverty. I just knew that money was the answer to all of my issues. So I wanted to be a success, and I wanted to be a millionaire. And I didn't just want to be a millionaire. I wanted to get there by 30, because that was the dream, that was the goal, and I'd be set for the rest of life. I actually achieved my goal 4 years ahead of what I was shooting for, but the bottom fell out of my first business way back in 2006. My wife and I jokingly say that 06 was a good year. We might be able to dive deeper into why we had that joke, but it was a difficult time. So the bottom fell out of my business, and it's because my business was too heavily dependent upon me. I didn't understand the difference between building a sustainable and scalable business versus doing deals, which is what I learned to do. And it was too heavily dependent upon debt. But I mentioned that because it was through that experience that I really discovered my why. My why is to build businesses that bless the world, as you mentioned. And it also gave me a burning desire to be what I didn't see. I was looking for, during my first foray into entrepreneurship, I was looking for mentors. And for whatever reason, one reason or another, and I have more context now and perspective, but it just didn't work out. And because of that, I wanted to help others to avoid the challenges that I had. So the through line, and what I've been doing for the past 2 decades, has been coaching and consulting in some form or fashion. It's been with rapid revenue growth, systems for scale, lean startup methodology. But what I've always done is invested a significant amount of time working with leaders regarding strategy and leadership development. About 2.5 years ago, I had this deep revelation that in order to have the type of multiplicative impact that my heart pants about, I needed to change the audience that I serve. Now, I love the underdog, and I always will appreciate working with small business owners, but I launched Employee Success Company, which is designed to do what you read, enhance employee engagement, performance, and retention, because I wanted to have a deeper impact. So I wanted to start working with larger corporations. So that's a little bit about my journey. I took the longer route, so thank you for your patience.
Can I just say a couple things that I recognize in your story? Number one, I know what it means when a man or a woman remembers the number, like remembers the family's monthly number. I've lived that world myself, and it gets ingrained in you, like you, and it does, I think, change. It changes how you process the world. Like you recognize the limitations and the pressures that are on you and your family. And but what I also recognize is when someone grows up in a world that they're struggling to figure out, like, is it supposed to be this way? Does it have to be this way? How can it be different? And when you don't have anyone around you who sits you down and says, hey, this is how stuff works. This is what you end up doing, is having to figure it out on your own first. Like I think you do develop a brain that figures things out. And then what you've done is you've transitioned from figuring things out now to helping other people, like explaining how stuff works, how it works. I think it's a fantastic journey. It's an amazing story. I appreciate you sharing that. So tell us more.
So if I could just piggyback off of that thought, it's interesting how a young brain processes because of the disappointments. And I wrote a post about this a couple of weeks back. Because of the disappointments of not being able to get mentorship, I made my life much more difficult than what it had to be because I did so many things in isolation. Did I realize that I needed to hire people? Yes. But what I'm referring to is not those that you would hire to work with or for you. I'm talking about one of the things that I did not do a good job of is get connected with supportive entrepreneurial networks and communities. Mm-hmm. I did not do a whole lot of networking because I thought, hey, this thing doesn't work. And what was really going on is I was trying to avoid pain. It was the pain of disappointment. And I also had the resolve, not that I needed to prove anything to anyone, that I was going to get it. I was going to get after it. So I just wanted to just share that we can develop some maladaptive habits as a result of things that are disappointing.
When you need that mentor the most, when you need that coach the most, for many of us, that's when you feel the least confidence in reaching out to that person and asking for help. It's weird. I'll ask for help when I don't need it anymore. I'll tell my story when I have a success story to tell. When in fact, if you can just flip that around to say, you have to be cautious about who you choose because not everyone is going to lead you, in a great direction.
Yes, you do.
But recognize the need for, first of all, connection.
Absolutely.
The need for others at whatever stage you happen to be in life, and then try to be very discerning regarding who you reach out to. But I'm tracking with you so totally.
Yeah, one of the things that, and I called it the lonely. Well, I've given it I've coined a couple of different terms, but the season of isolation, it can do a number of things. For me, the thing that it forced is for me to get really, really good at what I did. And it was easy for me to engage in that type of isolating season because despite the fact that I teach and I train and I speak, I'm actually an introvert. So I didn't challenge. The pain kept me from challenging myself. And then my introverted nature said, I don't want to do it anyway. It feels awkward and uncomfortable. But I'll tell you this, and then we can move on to something else. It was because of that disappointment that gave me a drive and burning desire to be a blessing to other people in a way that I wish I'd experienced. So I don't lament at all that it happened. As a matter of fact, it's part of the driving factor for what I do now. So I'll pause there. I know we could beat that horse for quite a bit.
Man, I got to tell you, I for obvious reasons, I can't quite call us twin sons from different mothers, but I'm so tracking with the story. I am, and that whole journey, and then you reach a point where when you feel like you do have a few things figured out, you do have this urge to share with others, urge to help others, because no one was there for me in the earlier years to crack the code of how,
Absolutely.
and so many lessons learned by doing it wrong. And then
Yes.
figuring, well, that doesn't work. Let's try another wrong way and another wrong way. And then when you finally do land on what works, yes, you want to share that to the degree
you want to share it. And to that point, I happen to have a Christian worldview. I'm not interested in imposing my worldview or faith upon your audience, but there's a scripture that says, to whom much is given, much is required. So I feel it is my obligation, and especially as we talk about leadership, if we just expand the thinking around what we're talking about now, I think it is a requirement for those of us who are a bit more informed, who have bumped our heads a lot. And if we actually want to see change, I've looked at a few of your podcasts, and I know that you will tongue in cheek, you'll jokingly say, I'm feeling a bit cynical, about what's going on. The thing that gets me excited is that we're called to be salt and light. So for those of us who are concerned about, and for those of us who are stirred about the challenges that we see, then it's upon us to be able to affect change. So I love the work that you're doing.
Are you a fan of the series Game of Thrones?
Oh my goodness, I never got into Game of Thrones. I know that it was just a cult favorite, but I never really got into it. But please do tell.
No, well, for those who are listening who know Game of Thrones, there's a phrase that's used early on and then carries through the entire series. The phrase is "winter is coming," and the intent of the phrase was, even in good times, we need to prepare for winter. And then eventually in the series, winter does come and lots of bad things happen. But that phrase for me, "winter is coming," here's what I feel. I feel like winter is coming. And again, I could be overly cynical. I think I'm an optimistic person, but I look around me, I look at the world, and I look at everything from misinformation overwhelm, information overwhelm. I look at what's happening with social media, with screens in front of us. I look how disconnected we're becoming because we spend more time looking at screens than we do engaging with each other. And I'm not judging, because I do the same thing. I look at how leaders more broadly in the world, and also leaders in our own little worlds, and they just suck. I'm sorry, but they do.
They just suck, man.
I remember growing up in a world where there were at least a few people we could all look up to, a few people that we could say, I trust her, I trust him. And I'm not saying those people don't exist, but broadly in the world right now, it's pretty rare. And I could go on and on about how technology is working against us. AI seems to be working against us. The economy, the equity factor. There was a time when you could say, if I put in X number of hours, X amount of hard work, I will get back a certain amount. And I just feel like that equation has changed for a lot of people, not for everybody. The wealthy still doing well, but the not so wealthy not doing well. And so I'll stop. You use the words cynicism. So you triggered me, and I have to stop. I have to pull myself back, because I love talking to people who are innately a little more optimistic than I am. People like yourself. In the same way, if you've listened to some of the other podcasts, then this is not news to you. I'm not a believer. I'm more of an agnostic.
Sure.
And yet one of my best friends is Larry Julian, author of the book, God is My CEO, one of the major books about embedding faith into how you operate your business. I have other really strong people of faith who are good friends of mine. And I think they probably hope that eventually I come around. But what I'm committed to is authenticity, like whatever is real.
Absolutely.
But I look at the works. I look at the works of my Christian friends, and you can't deny the output of those works. So I love talking to men and women of faith. I love talking to deep thinkers like yourself. And I think I'd love to hear about like your practical approach, like how whether it's the frameworks that you've built, the systems,
Sure.
or the approach, just anything you're comfortable sharing with us right now.
Sure. Well, the first thing that I would share, oh my God, the temptation, Dan, is so great for me to comment on at least 3 or 4 things that you just shared. But I'm going to be on my best behavior and do my best to honor your request. Let's talk about a practical approach. Just as a preface, I would say we have to be very intentional, and that intentionality, I think, it has to be heart-led or heart-centered, because we as human beings have become pretty attuned to when we're being manipulated or when things are sincere. So as we talk about what it means to be intentional about developing our leaders, and yes, we know that the end result of that will be great things for the company. After all, we have a company to run. Profitability is what we're shooting for. Growth, if you're not growing, you're dying. So this is important. So what I don't want to propose, because I know some of it is going to sound a bit fluffy. I don't want to propose that we're just having a love fest and all we have to do is just love on one another. No, we have metrics that we have to hit. We have goals that we need to achieve. We have a vision that we need to fulfill, and we have to do that with people. All right, that's a preface. One of the things that I had to reverse engineer and codify was, why is it that, be it in companies large or small, my own, or whether I was working for one of my largest clients, I helped them grow from 6 clinics to 61 clinics across the country with very little turnover and a third of the usual staffing. Why is it that people who were under my leadership, they not only did they not leave, but they wanted to do all that they could to do anything that they thought would be helpful for me as we moved whatever initiative forward that we were moving toward, right? And it wasn't because I was so special. Let me just say that. It was because my people knew how special they were to me. And so what I ended up developing is a methodology that I call the ACTS method. And the A in the ACTS method stands for aspirations. Mm-hmm. So what was one of the things that I did on a regular basis? I was very intentional about meeting with people, not when it was our regular staff meeting time, not when there was a challenge. I want to meet with you one-on-one, and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything we have going on in this job, because I am into you. Tell me what your goals and dreams are. If time and money were not a circumstance, you tell me, what are your goals and dreams? What is it that makes your heart pant? What is it that will keep you up at night staring at the ceiling? And then I become a facilitator of that. All right, these are your personal goals and dreams. These are your aspirations. Let's put together a plan that will help you achieve your personal goals and dreams. Now, your personal developmental plan based upon what you're doing in the company at your current position or any position that you aspire to, that's separate. This is all things about you as a person, as an individual. So the A stands for aspirations. The C in the ACTS method stands for calling, because most of us know what it's like to have invested a significant amount of time, a significant amount of effort, a significant amount of resources reaching for a particular goal or dream. And then when we get there, is that it? Right? The joy behind it is fleeting. It's somewhat short-lived. Now, we could talk about the psychology and neurobiology behind that, but I think that would take us down a different path. So the C in the ACTS method stands for calling. Let me help you discover and demonstrate what you are uniquely called to do. If there's a role and an opportunity within the company that's a better fit, yes, absolutely, let's go for it. But again, this may or may not have anything to do at all with what you're doing inside of the company. So the first thing is we help you achieve your greatest aspirations, your goals and dreams. The second thing is we help you discover and demonstrate what you're uniquely called to do. You are uniquely, Dan, called to do what you're doing. Your passion drives this. It is very evident, right? That's why you're able to attract such high quality leaders. That's why so many people appreciate what you do, because they know that this is a burning desire of yours. And I would dare argue, I don't know how you feel about it, but if I could impose this, I believe this is a significant part of what you're called to do, especially in this season in your life, right? The T in the Acts method stands for transformation. Now, we know about major training initiatives in HR, but what's different regarding this type of training is, yes, not only are we going to train you for the role you have and the roles that you aspire for, but the transformation and the type of training to facilitate this transformation is going to make you not just a better employee and a better leader here, but because of what we're doing, my life is transformed and I'm a better husband. Because of what this company is doing, when I go home, I'm a much better father to my children. I'm a much better mother. I'm a much better spouse. So the T is transformation. The first three letters in the Acts method is employee focus. The S is support. How can I build in systematic or structural support during the critical moments of employees' lives? For example, when your son or your daughter goes off to college, let's make sure we get them a nice care package and something that's going to encourage them in their journey. When the employee, for example, acquires a new home, that's a major milestone, right? So let's make sure we have a gift card. Let's make sure we have a wonderful packet of welcome home. How can we do this? And then when your people lose someone close, or you find out that now, you know, your mother-in-law or your father-in-law or your mom or your dad, they moved in because now you're the primary caregiver. How can I show you during life's most critical moments that I care for you and you're more than just a cog? You are more than just a human doing, you are a human being. It's interesting that companies are considered legal people, right? A legal entity is a person, so to speak. But since the beginning of time, as we talk about what does it mean for mass manufacturing or companies at scale in general, we have tried to just treat people like a workforce unit, so to speak. And, you know, you see in private equity, and this is not me necessarily taking shots. This is pretty prevalent. I get it. And sometimes companies are a little bit bloated. They didn't plan appropriately, or as a means of survival, they need to cut back. I get it. But just thinking of people and their collective labor as a whole, as opposed to identifying them as individuals that you need to care for. And when you can just simply buy a company and cut 4 or 5 different units or sell them off or just eliminate these roles because technology will come in and it can do the job of multiple people. It's like that's something, and that's the direction that we continually move in. But it's so interesting. It's like we forget the lessons of the past. We'll do this and then we'll have to course correct. And then we forget the history and then we'll do it again. And we'll have to course correct. So let me pause there. I know I've said a lot, but I'll pause there just to get your.
You and I do this to each other. I like you're triggering me, and I'm taking notes because there are so many things I want to respond to. So I'm gonna start with, and I'll make this brief. I'm gonna start with my.
I'm sorry. Forgive me for being rude. Can I jump right in? There was one thing that I really, really need to share about the Acts method. I'm sorry. Forgive me for doing this. The end goal, or what we're actually producing with the Acts method, is a deep sense of reciprocity. We've all heard that engagement equals EBITDA. So when you have been so transformative in someone's life, when they can when people can begin to reframe their thinking around the idea that when I come to this place, man, my goals and dreams are being fulfilled. When I come to this place, I'm learning what it is that I'm called to do, and they give me an opportunity, or at least give me a framework with how I can demonstrate that. When I come to this place, my life is transformed. Not only am I going to stay, I'm going to give you everything I have because I'm so deeply appreciative of how you've had such a transformative impact upon my life. Okay, I stopped. I'll pause. My apologies.
Perfect. So first, a brief rant about private equity, but then we'll get to the real important stuff. I want to unpack the Acts method and just have commentary about that. But private equity, honestly, you're trying to be as positive as possible while acknowledging the challenges. My real world experience of private equity over the past 30 years, multiple times, is group of investors says, okay, there's a company. Let's generate a bunch of debt, first of all, in order to buy the company. And then we're going to layer that debt onto the company. So I'm going to buy you but after I buy you, you're going to have this debt. So immediately you're
Sure.
under a constraint you weren't on before. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this as the parts are more valuable than the whole. So if you've
Sure.
got some historic real estate or legacy real estate, we're going to sell that off and move you into an office complex that we're just leasing. So we're not there permanently. We're going to look at your employees through a very jaded eye of productivity, and not long-term productivity, not long-term careers, but what are you going to do for us in the next quarter or 2 quarters? And if you're not making a contribution in the next quarter or 2 quarters, I'm sorry, but we're going to restructure and move you on your way. Basically, picking if you've ever baked a chicken and then done when you do pulled chicken.
Sure.
Hey, we're gonna take this baked chicken. We're gonna pull all the meat off of the bones, and after we cut everything off the bones, and we, the private equity investors, are all fat and happy and full, we'll leave you with this chicken carcass. So I know that's a little extreme. I know, but I am not a fan of what private equity has done to the working environment most of the time. Not all the time. I know there are exceptions.
Sure.
But most of the time. So the ACTS method, that fascinates me for a couple of reasons. One is that I fear, as people listen to this, they latch on to the S, the support, because if all you do is the support, let's take all the rest, the support will ring hollow if you're just passing out gift cards, if you're sending things in the mail, if you're giving gifts, if you're even like very tangible support like scholarships or things like that. All of it's good, but it will ring hollow if you don't have the ACT in advance of it. And what the ACT requires more than anything else is conversations, and what that requires is time. And what leaders seem to have forgotten is that if you have 7 direct reports or 12 direct reports, whatever the number is, part of leading them is giving them of yourself, giving them time. So taking the time to ask about their aspirations, taking the time to think through what is this person not seeing in themselves? What are some strengths that aren't obvious? So how do I help them discern what's uniquely their calling? Because most people do need a little help in terms of determining what is your purpose here? What is your calling here? What is your unique gift? Why are you in this place? And then that transformation step. True leaders are transformative, I believe. True leaders drive change. True leaders recognize that point where you, the person I'm leading, have grown beyond where you are here. You may not recognize it because you're now suddenly feeling comfortable. You're feeling like I've arrived. I know this job. I know that everything's the way I was hoping it would be. And a really great leader will step in to say, this is the time to become uncomfortable.
Yes.
This is the time to move on. It may be moving on internally. It may be moving on externally. But a great leader sees things in you that you don't always see in yourself. But all of those things, they take time. And I would say if there's one big mega trend that I've seen in the last few decades, leaders are giving their people less and less real time and less thinking time. They're not thinking about their people deeply. They're not engaging with their people deeply. One of the best pieces of advice I got a few years ago was my own coach said, how often do you ask your people how you're doing for them? Just directly ask, create an environment where you're comfortable asking and they're comfortable telling. Simply say, at the end of maybe a quarterly or annual performance review, just say, so let's talk about how I'm showing up as a leader for you. What's working and what's not working? It's a scary question for a leader to ask, particularly if
it is a scary question. It is. If I could just share, I think a part of the challenge, there are a number of different reasons that makes the ACTS method challenging. That's one of the reasons why I provided the service. Why I created the service, so that much of this can be outsourced. But not the least of which, as we consider the challenges, many people, because of their personal production, were put in positions of leadership when they had absolutely no training to be a leader. It's almost it's apples and oranges, but it's the equivalent of just because I know how to bake a great cake does not mean I know how to build a business that gives me the same quality cakes on time every time with the type of consistency and quality that I know from an individual perspective. So that's one thing. Secondarily, you have a lot of different leadership development styles. I was just on I'll be doing an international podcast, and one of the things that we discuss is, it's more of an Americanized idea that your people have to be the center of where you spend the vast majority of your focus. So I think the mindset behind people not as a work unit, but people really as a real asset or the asset to the company, that has to be embraced. And then the third thing I'll share, though there are others, it requires courage to the point that you made. I think leaders who are most effective are those that are courageous enough to be vulnerable. They are courageous enough to know that even though I invest all of this time and this energy going above and beyond for my people, it might not necessarily be reciprocated or not reciprocated in a way that I would have liked. So you risk the idea of having your heart broken. So, I liken it to, and you talked about the importance of time. Before I had kids, one of the pieces of wisdom that I received is that the way that kids spell love is Time. I think in many ways, though we're talking about employees and their relationship with their leader, I think that wisdom holds true. You have to show people that you care by giving them intentional time that is all about them.
And in its own way, it is love. In its own way, it is that deep sense of, I respect you, I see you. I fully see like the strengths, the challenges. I see you, and then I'm going to give you the respect of sharing what I see, and hopefully helping in some way, big or small.
If I could also share, as you talk about the strengths and the weaknesses, it also requires courage, because when you're in a relationship with someone, you have to love them enough to offend them. And you have to give them the balance of both tough and tender love. So when somebody has given something their all and they've completely blown it and they're discouraged, well, it wouldn't necessarily be well suited for you to come in and kick them while they're down. So you need to know how to disseminate both tough and tender love. But when you see that somebody has much greater in them, right, and for whatever reason they're not living up to what's in their own best interest, right? I'm all into you first. Do we all have a job to do? Yes. As a leader, especially if we're using John Maxwell's definition of leadership, which is influence, should I influence you so that we can achieve the common goal? Absolutely. But I need you to know I'm in a balancing act. We have goals to fulfill, but just because we have goals to fulfill does not mean that I don't care and I'm not all into you as a person. So it requires courage, because more often than not, we don't like to challenge people, even when it's our job to do so. And I would argue that it's always our job to do so, separate conversation, because of how it makes us feel. So you're going to love me, but because of your own insecurities and the fear of your own discomfort, you're going to let me walk off of a cliff because you don't like how it's going to make you feel. You got to be courageous.
And that's actually a big lesson for me personally, because I'm also an introvert, tend to be instinctively non-confrontational. And in the same way that I figured out the world, I kind of hope that other people will figure out the world. So I had a situation recently where someone who reports to me, she had written some marketing copy, and I was to review the marketing copy, and I reviewed it. And my honest impression was that she'd used some form of AI to write this. It was perfectly fine, but that was the tell. When something is sort of perfectly fine, a little deeper than she would normally write, a little longer than she would normally write, perfectly fine, perfectly bland, perfectly perfect. And so I was struggling, because I realized I need to give her this feedback now and soon, because I don't want her to develop this habit that she may be, but I don't know that she used AI.
Sure.
So I sat down with her, and I knew I had to respectfully but directly confront this. So I shared with her my impression as a reader of this, making sure that, the tone is, now all this was virtual. So then when it's virtual,
Okay.
you have to be even more attentive to your
Yes.
tonality and to the engagement with the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And we eventually got to a good place where but it had to be intentional. I think if I had just been operating instinctively, I would have said, you know what, it's not bad. It's not embarrassing. We
Sure.
can publish this. We're going to be fine. But I think for me, the key with her is I said to her, I don't actually see you in this. And the reason I like your writing is usually I can recognize your voice.
Sure.
And I don't
Sure.
hear your voice in this. And that made everything else okay. It made it the hard part where I had to say, this feels like, an AI generated document. When we began to talk about her voice, that softened it up, and it was the right feedback delivered in the right way for her. And you'd mentioned, engagement in general. We know, in fact, you were telling me before the podcast started, you were telling me about some recent, research about employee engagement. We know that for decades and decades, employee engagement has been drifting downward, no matter how much companies have been investing in the S, of acts, the support services. We're going to give you
That's the
better coffee.
EAP programs that are rarely ever maximized.
Yes. We're going to give you the bells and whistles, but we're not going to give you the time. And I would argue that if you give someone your time, your genuine, deep thinking leadership time, I'm not saying the S isn't valuable. It is, but it'll have much more perceived value if it comes from someone who sees you, who knows you, who engages with you, who gives you the time to know you.
I 100% agree with you. The challenge is culture is made up of people. And when you try to systematize things to remove the responsibility of people impacting the culture, I think that's where you end up going wrong. You try to get so efficient and you sacrifice effectiveness, right? Yes, you can get really, really efficient, but the problem is people are people. We have mental and emotional challenges. We have things to go on. Life has a way of lifing on all of us. And sometimes it's not as efficient, but it's much more effective as you consider the long-term health of where you like to go with your company when your people know that they are prioritized, when they realize that they're valued, and when they can truly embrace the idea without this sense of insecurity that I know that you see me and I know that you care. Like, we could beat this horse to death. We've heard it over and over and over again that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. But what does that mean practically? What type of process are you going to put in place, and what type of metrics are we going to hold you accountable to ensure that you don't crowd your schedule with everything except for the things that make the most amount of difference? Because I don't believe in time management. Time management is a fallacy. The only thing we can do is manage priorities in the context of time. And what many people don't appreciate, and you said it earlier, and I just like to extrapolate it if I could, is that if you would have shot from the hip, then you would have done yourself and your employee a disservice. Everything has a time value attached. Critical thinking has a time value attached. Preparing for that meeting and thinking about, okay, I know the outcome. How exactly do I plan this out based upon what I know about my person so that she can hear me in a way that will produce the change without crushing her spirit unnecessarily?
And it doesn't guarantee success, but it sure increases the likelihood. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had I mentioned earlier a coach that I work with. what sold me on this coach in one of our early conversations is one of the things that he asked me was, give me a couple of examples of when you've been not so great, like the way you've been with the way you've shown up as a leader. As you look back on it, it kind of maybe causes you to cringe or embarrasses you. So I gave him 2 or 3 examples, and he said, the 3 examples that you shared, those are great examples, but they're from a couple decades ago. And I get that you've grown a lot, but there's a lot of emotional distance between mistakes you made 2 decades ago. Do you have anything like in this decade?
Right.
Well, then I had to think a little harder, but I went to the far end of the decade and I found an example, but it was still like many years ago. And he said, "What about today? Like if you're thinking about yourself 10 years from now, what will you know about today?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. If I knew, I guess I would fix it." He said, "Exactly. So maybe we can do something to give you some insight today." And then that led us to asking your people how you're showing up, asking them, because they're the one, they see it. He said, he introduced me to this term called the leadership microscope. He said, you're under a microscope all the time, even though you don't realize it. They're watching whether you show up on time for meetings or late for meetings. They're watching when someone is making comments or sharing ideas and you're nodding and smiling because you're really tracking, and then someone else shares an idea and you go flat. They notice everything. And so if you can create enough psychological safety where you can comfortably ask, how am I showing up for you as a leader? And get a really good, he said, if they're comfortable with you, they'll give you some nice things. They'll give you some acknowledgement. And then they will say hesitantly, "You know how, Dan, all of your meetings go long? That always kind of sets us up for challenges the next." Or, Dan, how we have these one-on-ones scheduled every week, but you cancel about half of them because you're so busy and stuff is going. Like the moment they mention those little things, pay close attention because it's hard enough for them to bring it up. So it's probably a bigger deal than even they will mention. And that was when my realization started to build regarding time. Like I was, you talk about time management or not believing in time management. What I was doing was I was letting my priorities get out of whack, because once I decide that they are the priority, if you're really intentional, they are the priority. Everything else you figure out.
If you're a leader, they're the priority.
Yeah.
The work that you're getting done is through your team. There's one thing that you said, they're always watching. And there's a phrase that I love, an Irish phrase, that life is better felt than telt. So that's one that I love to remember. The question is, what am I modeling at all times?
Absolutely. I had a fascinating conversation with a senior HR leader, and she was frustrated because their employee engagement surveys were coming back with not so great scores about leadership, mentoring, and coaching. Like does your leader offer you mentoring and coaching? Does your leader create value for you to enhance your career, et cetera, the kinds of things we're talking about? And they were getting relatively low scores. And she said to me, "But we have mandated that our leaders will have weekly one-on-ones with each of their direct reports. And we've mandated that they will have monthly one-over-ones with some percentage of." So what she said to me was, "We've mandated leader engagement." I said, "Okay, well, okay. Would you mind if I spoke to some of your leaders?" And we ended up having a little project where I did some outreach and I spoke with about a dozen of their leaders. And what I learned was exactly what you and I are talking about. Like the leaders had scheduled the weekly one-on-ones because it had been mandated, but easily half of them got canceled the day before because of other priorities, other things that were happening. And what else was revealed in these conversations was that many of these leaders had 12, 14, 15, 17 direct reports. Well, if you want leadership time, you can't have a 1-to-17 ratio.
No.
Your system is mandating then that sort of shallow
Yeah, you're pushing it
monitoring
at
of
10.
activity as opposed to engaging.
Yeah, you're really pushing it at 10.
Yes,
Like
yes.
you're really, really pushing the boundaries of quality leadership at 10, 17, 14, 15. Yeah, not so much. The thing that I think it's important that I could extrapolate from what you shared. When someone is the recipient of the type of transformation that we've discussed, they want to be able to do the same thing for others. So if you haven't seen that model, and if you haven't been the recipient of it, your head and your heart are really not in it. It's like, all right, we got this new initiative, this new breakthrough thing that's going to completely transform what we do. But all they're hearing is more work, some initiative that's going to die on the vine. But you really have to be the recipient of that. So versus, yes, you have to have accountability, absolutely. But before the accountability, did your key leaders demonstrate this? And are their people, were they deeply impacted by what you were doing? Because that's the way that it needs to happen. It needs to be modeled, not just the accountability, it's the heart behind it.
So, Ian, I know a lot of this is going to make sense to people. And I know that some people listening to this may be thinking, well, yeah, but haven't we been saying this for 10 years? Haven't we been saying this for 20 years? Or I think I've been kind of doing this maybe. But in fact, at least this is my point of view, I think the world is getting tougher. Yes. And so you have your corporate culture, and then you have your culture outside of the culture. And I think that culture is impacting the corporate culture, and things are changing. So employee expectations are changing. But at the same time that employee expectations are rising, like they're yearning. The employees, I believe, are yearning for what you just described. And yet leaders are saying the pace of work is so much faster than it used to be. The complexity of work is so much faster than it used to be. The amount of information that I have to process. You want me to do weekly one-on-ones? Look at my email inbox. Look at my team's messages. Look at my projects, because most companies now want their leaders to be player coaches. We want you to do work as well as be the leader coach. So I've got my job, and then I've got my leader job, and I'm trying to manage all of it. It's as if we're pushing against the ability of leaders to do the kinds of things that you and I are advocating for, at the same time that their employees, while they may not say it, because who wants to say, love me, help me, so spend more time with me. Right. In fact, you may hear the exact opposite. You may hear employees say, just leave me alone. Just let me do my job. Just, if you have teenagers, this, just because your teenager says, leave me alone, that does not mean they want you to leave them alone.
Right.
It may mean they want you to be with them differently. They want you to be more with them, probably, but in a different way. I think the same is true with employees. They yearn for the kind of leadership that you're talking about.
Agreed. I think if people think about, though we're all different, we have a through line. Our psychology doesn't change that much. The way that we're wired from a neurobiological perspective doesn't change that much. There are phrases called like failure to thrive. If you're a baby, without the type of human connection that we need, you literally can die from that. Babies often do. It's a really interesting thing how so many retirees within 5 years of leaving, some studies that have been done about how many of them pass on, how frequently or how quickly the second spouse passes on when they were up in age, in the eve of their lives. So we were designed to be connected. And to the point that you made, it doesn't really matter what's coming out of my mouth. We know how we're all wired. Now, again, it's different. It is different, but there are some things that have a consistent through line that we need to be aware of. I think it would do leaders well to understand psychology and neurobiology just a little bit more. I nerd out on that. That's perhaps a separate podcast, but we just need to understand that we have to reprioritize human beings and not human doings. We have to understand what makes us tick and how we're wired, and how is it that we can uniquely meet the needs of our people, or else what are your leadership for?
I'll tell you, I was so lucky. About a decade ago, prior to my current job, I worked for General Electric, and GE as a global company. I was hired into a position where my office was in Minnesota. My boss was in Connecticut. Her boss was in Philadelphia, and all of my colleagues and peers and direct reports were spread around mostly the U.S., some international. But here's now that was just interesting. It was pre-pandemic. That was interesting. I had an entirely virtual work environment. Even though I went to an office every day, I sat in my cubicle, and everybody that I interacted with was virtual. But the gift was that my direct supervisor was so amazing in the way that she managed a remote team. She was so intentional. She and I had deep conversations. We became really close friends. And each of the peers that we connected with, that there was a relationship there, and we had conversations about how to be remote, how to be a remote leader, how to be a remote peer, what the obligations are of what's different about being at a distance, so that you can create this bond, this cohesion, this effective work team, all spread out over the country and part of the world. So I have that as my normal, and then that job ended when GE sold off of all of their GE Capital businesses.
Sure.
And I was supporting their GE Capital businesses. Okay, so that goes away. But then the pandemic occurs, and I take this role, and I have a front row seat to leaders who've been basically given webcams and microphones, and that's their training. And they just operate the way they used to operate, no difference, no variation. And then they're shocked that people don't seem as engaged. People don't seem as connected. People don't seem as loyal. We have a higher turnover rate. We have higher dissatisfaction, because leading remotely is its own set of skills. It's its own set of capabilities. And I think there are many organizations that have not thought that through, to think, well, so then what happens is some senior leader goes, employees are disconnected. We need to move everyone back to the office. We need to move everyone back to the building, or whenever. And then they're completely oblivious to the fact that these employees have adjusted their lifestyle.
They built their lives around this freedom.
Yes, their daycare, their meal plans, their exercise plans, their finances. I no longer have to spend on this commute. I no longer have to spend on these other things. So much of their life has realigned, and an edict comes down: in order to boost culture, we're going to force you back, as opposed to investing less than a tenth of that amount of money into, we're going to help your leaders be more intentional about leading remotely, connecting remotely. But there's this through line to everything that we're talking about. And it's the leaders who are awake enough, who are thinking enough, who are giving leadership the time that it needs to think through, how am I showing up for my people? How am I engaging with them? How am I creating an intentional relationship, whether it's virtual or face-to-face or some hybrid of the two? And so I wonder if you look at all the challenges, I wonder if time is the big one. Maybe the fact that our world is moving faster, more complex, leaders just have less time, or feel like they have less time. I wonder if that ends up being the root cause, possibly. I don't know that for sure. I'm just talking and thinking at the same time. But we're all so busy. We've all got so much going on. I don't know. Does that prompt any thoughts?
So I would be interested in seeing what the data say. What do the data points say about how much time people are actually working? Because all of the stats and all of the research that I've seen in times past, people are only spending a fraction of their time while they're at work actually working. So while I agree that things are moving much faster and AI is accelerating the pace of change, I'm still not convinced that we have 80% of our workforce investing or spending even 80% of their time actually working. I could be wrong. So I think that's one thing. And I know that varies by industry, but that's one thing that comes to mind.
Sure.
I think that one of the big challenges is always intentionality. Like so how much time are you investing and how intentional about this time that you are investing so that you can maximize it for greatest output. Not dissimilar to what employers are looking for, right? I want the minimum input for maximum output. Well, how do we design that? I think that I don't know if I would take a minimalist approach as I think about people, because people need the time. Now, I'm realistic. I recognize that, again, everything has a time value attached to it, even time to think critically. But I don't know, I liken it to, and I'm not trying to be paternalistic as we think about employees. I'm not saying employees are your kids, but I think a good analogy, what's analogous to what you do with your employees is everybody needs to have some time, but some of your kids, based upon their makeup, their DNA, the unique challenges they have, some of them need more time than others. See, I think the challenge for most leaders is that we don't appreciate the fact that we need to be chameleons. We need to adjust to our people rather than having to have our people adjust to us. Now, are there certain behaviors that we want to model so that we can see those demonstrated in our people? Absolutely. But as I think about kids, sometimes this kid may need much more time and much more attention based upon the season that they're in, and that may shift. So some of it, though you want to have a systematic approach and you want to have a structure, you want to have a framework, there is freedom within that framework because people don't fit nicely within wonderful frameworks. So those are the things that come to mind. I'll pause because I know
I'm completely aligning with you. And I think if you take the time up front to really understand each of your individual direct reports, you will understand the frequency of engagement, the time of engagement, even the depth of engagement. There are going to be some employees where, if you get too personal, it feels intrusive to them. That's just not what they want. And I happen to be one of those where I have certain boundaries that I don't want to pass, but that's, again, I appreciate that in individuality. I also, you talk about this deep sense of reciprocity. That phrase, I wrote it down because it resonates with me. In fact, I'm going to write it and stick it on my monitor for a while, because I want to think about that phrase and how do we how do we create that sense of reciprocity with our people? It's not just giving our time, but it's giving time, giving of ourselves, giving of our honesty, our integrity, I guess whatever that other person values, creating value for them in whatever works for them. I know I want to be respectful of our time. I know we're going to wrap up here shortly. I wanted to end on one thing. I recognized in you from the get-go a certain sense of humor, a certain sense of lightness, a certain energy. I don't know what to call it, but I think one of the ways we can help our employees be more engaged is to bring that lightness to our role as well. Leadership doesn't have to be so heavy. Work doesn't have to be so heavy. It's okay to make jokes. Oh, there's some research that validates the value of dad jokes. So here is the value of dad jokes, because the dominant male in the family unit can be a little imposing, can be a little scary. So when men, now I think a lot of men tell dad jokes and don't even realize the amazing psychology behind it. When men tell dad jokes that basically are the jokes that kind of make you cringe, it's like,
Sure.
not as funny as you think it is, Dad.
Yeah.
Well, what it does is it demystifies the dominant male. It makes the dominant male more approachable, less intimidating, less scary. So there's actually a case to be made for dad jokes. Now, I don't know if I'm just self-validating my own tendency toward dad jokes, but it's interesting that like humor and our overall lightness, our humanity, if we can bring our humanity to the role of a leader, I think, again, I'm going to use the word yearning again. I think we're yearning for someone who will just be human with me and see me as a human and connect with me. And yes, of course, drive productivity. There's a job to be done. Work has to be done, but can't we kind of have some fun along the way as we?
Fun is a core value of my company. There is a, and I promise this is the last scripture that I'll mention. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, life is short and it's filled with trouble. And so perspective makes so much of the difference. Like what's wrong is always available. It is always available. And it's even much more prevalent now in the day and age of social media. But so is what's right, right? What's wrong is always available, but so is what's right. And if we have our choice, who wants to focus on what's wrong? Who wants to, now there's some people who just want to be cynical, but there's a deeper issue there that we even want to get a chance to get to know our people so that we can find out. The question is, who hurt you? Separate issue. But the reality is, I don't know anyone who just relishes being miserable. Now, some people are miserable because it gives them a sense of significance and it gives them the attention. But how about we give you the attention and you don't have to be miserable? So we are humans craving this connection. I don't know anyone who doesn't like the idea of going to work and having a wonderful boss who cares deeply about me, who knows me and my kids' names, who helps me achieve my personal goals and dreams, who makes the job and environment fun, who goes on outings with me, who loves to come in and crack jokes. So I'm doing my job as 12 hours later, it doesn't feel like it because he's hilarious and I care about these people that I'm rolling with. I just don't know anybody who says, ew, no, I don't want it. How about we work to create that type of culture? And if we do, the results will follow.
We all want to do a good job. Nobody intentionally does a bad job. We want to do a good job.
Very many people who say, I want to be a bum today.
We all want to be a valued member of the tribe. We all want to be a valued member of the community. In fact, we all want the community to say, oh, we see what you did there. And that was valuable. Thank you for being a part of us. So Ian, you and I could go on. I can just tell you and I could go on and on. So here's what we're going to do. I think that you and I will have a follow-up session at some point in the future. There's so much more to talk about. But for the people who want to reach out to you now, I will make sure that in the show notes, we have a link to your LinkedIn profile, a link to your websites. We will make sure that we make it easy for people to connect with you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this so much because it boosts my day for the rest of the day. It gives me endorphins. This is one of my dopamine sources. So this is fantastic. Any final words you want to share?
I just simply want to share what a privilege it has been. And I thank you for mentioning that I'll have the opportunity to come back. This has been a blast. We could have done this until this time tomorrow. So I'm looking forward to learning what good damage we might be able to do so that we can impact the world. So I'm sure I'm going to reach out immediately so that we can have a conversation offline, just to learn how can we add value? How can we spread this DNA that we'd like to see?
Absolutely. And I know you are appearing on other podcasts, but I also know I'm going to end up being your favorite. That's my goal.
Yes, you are, Dan. Absolutely. I love it. Thank you again so much for having me.
Bye now.